Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and welcome to South Simcoe Railway. My name is Andy, and it is my pleasure to be your conductor and your guide on this afternoon's journey into Ontario's railway history. Just as we're pulling out of the station, I do need to review a couple of basic safety rules. We do ask that all passengers remain seated during our journey today. Walking through or between the moving coaches is prohibited for your own personal safety. Now, these coaches were all built in the 1920s, but they've been equipped with all sorts of modern conveniences. And that includes the personal air conditioning units, which you'll find conveniently located next to every seat. I think in the 20s they called them windows. If your window is open, please ensure that it is securely propped up with the stick which we provide for that purpose. This minimizes the chance of a high-speed encounter between the window frame and your fingers. Also, please remember to keep your head, your hands, your arms, and any other body parts you've decided you like inside the coach at all times while the train is in motion. Now, our third safety rule is very simple, and that is that there is no smoking permitted on board the train at any time, with one exception. Can anybody guess what that exception might be? That would be engine 136, the big black steam locomotive at the south end of the train. She's been smoking her entire working life, and we learned early on in this game that every one of our locomotives was built to smoke. We don't expect her to give up the habit anytime soon. However, in the unlikely event that she chooses today to quit smoking, we hope that all passengers have read the terms and conditions printed on your ticket, especially condition number 4, and understand what your responsibilities will be.
I'll shovel the snow.
We are very proud that engine 136 is the engine on our train today. She was built in 1883 by the Rogers Locomotive Works in Paterson, New Jersey. And she was built for the Canadian Pacific Railway, who put her into service 2 years before the completion of the transcontinental railway line to the west coast. And she was instrumental in helping to complete that vital link that made Canada as we know it today possible. She gave 77 years of service to the Canadian Pacific, and that ended with retirement in 1960, at which time she was the oldest operating locomotive in scheduled service in North America. Now, she'd survived longer than most because she was very light and very short, able to go around the tight curves and over the lightweight bridges in rural New Brunswick. She was working out of Chipman Yard in the middle of the province. But in the summer of 1960, a new breed of diesel locomotive, diesel engine number 22, showed up in Chipman Yard, and engine 136 was sent off to her well-earned retirement. Now, as an interesting footnote to that story, in 1974, diesel engine 22 was retired by the Canadian Pacific, and she found her way into our collection. You may have noticed her on the side track as we pulled out of the yard area. Now, when we started operating here, we had not yet restored engine 136 to operating condition, so we started hauling our passenger trains with engine 22, who was then replaced by the engine she had replaced all those years ago in Chipman. Kind of a nice ending to the story. Now, engine 136 is a coal-burning engine, and during a typical operating day of 4 trips, we will go through approximately 2 tons of coal, all shoveled by hand into the firebox by the firemen. We have a crew full on board the train today. 2 of them are located in the locomotive cab. The engineer works the throttle, the brakes, the lights, the bell, and of course the great steam whistle that you hear of every crossing. The fireman's the one doing all the hard work, shoveling all that coal to keep the fire nice and hot, because it's the heat from the coal fire that boils the water, 4,000 gallons every day. And that produces the steam that pushes the pistons, moves the connecting rods, and makes the great big driving wheels go round. And of course that's what moves us up and down the track. Now, I introduced myself as your conductor, and a lot of people are not too sure what that job involves, but the conductor is the person who's in charge of the train. Some people think that's part of the engineer's job, and I've even worked with a couple of engineers that think that, but no, the conductor is the boss. Tells the engineer when it's time to leave the station, makes sure the crew are doing the right jobs in the right places at the right times, takes care of passenger comfort and safety. Now, if you've been paying attention, you've probably figured out by this point that we are going backwards. The engine's on the south end of the train, but we are traveling north. Now, this was very common on branch railway lines like this, where they didn't have anywhere to turn the train around. So they did what we're doing today. They would run backwards for half the journey and forwards for the other half of the journey. A steam engine really doesn't care whether it's operating in forward or reverse. It's only a matter of which end of the cylinder you put the steam into first. When you're thinking about this backwards operation, a question may come into your mind, and that question should be this. We're going backwards and the engine's at the rear end of the train. How can the engineer see where we're going? That one's actually very simple. He can't. But if you're concerned by that, you haven't been counting, because I said we had a crew of 4 on board the train today. So let's see, that's an engineer, fireman, a conductor, and trainman Julie. She's standing at the north end of the train. She's in radio contact with the engineer. That's how the engineer knows the track ahead is safe to travel. Now coming up just ahead is the first of 5 road crossings of the northbound part of our journey. In keeping with our 1930s appearance that we try to maintain here, we do not have any flashing lights or gates or bells at our crossings to warn motorists of the approach of a train. So we use an old-fashioned device called a flagman. He stands out in the middle of the road with a big red flag and makes sure all the cars know that they have to come to a stop. Now our flagmen do get a little lonely out there, so if you see them, please do wave at them. Also wave at any motorists that are stopped waiting for the train. This helps us maintain our reputation as a friendly railway. Started down around Burlington, came up from Georgetown, Palgrave, Tottenham, which we just left, on to Beeton, which is our destination this afternoon. Just north of Beeton there was a place called Alamo Junction, and there the line split in 2. One branch continued on up to Collingwood. The other branch took a more easterly turn over through Cookstown to Allendale, which is nowadays a suburb of Barrie. There was a very important branch line in those days. It connected Burlington down on Lake Ontario, Collingwood with all the shipbuilding businesses, and Barrie, which is still to this day the industrial heart of central Ontario. It was also a very important line for agriculture because it passed through some of the best farmland in southern Ontario. It was the means by which farmers got their farm equipment and supplies in and their farm produce out to market. You can see by the fields of corn on both sides of the line, this is still important agricultural country. Now I've been keeping an eye on that corn. It's been growing extremely well this year, way ahead of schedule. And the reason I'm so interested in that corn is I tend to get hungry on some of these excursions, and I see all this fresh corn, and then I think about our steam locomotive and realize that's a big pot of boiling water. What do you do when you have fresh corn in a big pot of boiling water? I figure I can use that for my lunch. Now school children knew all about the trains as well, because most of the small farming villages along the line were too small to have a school. And there were no school buses, but there were passenger trains. So every morning the kids would either go to the local railway station or the nearest road crossing. When the passenger train came through, it would pick them up the line to the next village that had a school, let them off the train there. They'd go to school, and in the afternoon they'd come home the same way. Really very much the same as school buses of today, or really I should say school buses of tomorrow, for all of you that are heading back to school tomorrow morning. Now we are beginning our descent into the Beeton Creek Valley. You will notice that the ground is starting to slope away from us on both sides of the line. The creek and river valleys were popular spots for the railway builders because they were very flat and level and afforded a very nice place to build a railway line that didn't have any steep hills in it. There were 2 ways to do that, of course. You could either move a lot of earth, carve the top off all the hills and use it to fill in all the valleys, or you could let Mother Nature do the work for you. Over thousands of years, that's precisely what the rivers have done. And a smart railway builder followed the curves of the river, had a nice level place between all the hills to build the railway line. The Beeton Creek Valley is home to not one, but in fact two railway lines. Ours was completed up the west side of the valley in 1878. In 1906, the Canadian Pacific Railway came along and they built a line up the east side of the valley. About a mile and a half further up the line, we're going to go underneath a big railroad bridge, and at the top of it we're past that Canadian Pacific line. Now they added probably the most colorful story to the local history books. They used to have a train called the Alliston Loco, usually headed by steam engine 99. Travel up north from Beeton every morning through Tottenham and Beeton to Alliston. Then the crew would stop and eat their lunch, do their paperwork, switch all their boxcars around, and by late afternoon they'd be ready to head back south. They'd come through Tottenham at 6 o'clock every night and blow their whistle. All the townsfolk, when they heard the whistle, would get up from the dining table, set the big clock in the kitchen to say precisely 6, because they knew that the engineer and the conductor of old number 99 kept her running right on time. And this continued on until one very foggy November evening. The fog had started around lunchtime and then it began to rain. A light drizzle at first, but by dinner time, a full-fledged thunderstorm with thunder, lightning, torrential rains, and even a bit of hail. But the worst part of the story was that 6 o'clock came and went with no sound of a whistle. And by 6:30 there was still no whistle, and the townsfolk were a little worried. They'd never heard of Engine 99 being half an hour late before, but this was a good railway town. They knew what to do. They organized a search party, and they were walking up the track to see what they could find.
I think we're coming up to
Now we're just crossing. You'd see another railway crossing, and that's where the Canadian Pacific tracks cross the road. And it was about 100 yards north of that crossing that the search party met up with 4 people walking south down the track. And they could see when they got closer that it was the engineer, the fireman, the conductor, and the brakeman from old number 99. And when they got them home and got some hot soup into them, the whole story was told. How number 99 had come around the front curve, and there in front of them, they saw that the torrential rains had washed out the railway embankment. The rails led down into the creek. Now, all the crew managed to jump to safety. Nobody was hurt, but old Engine 99 went right down into the mud at the bottom of the Beeton Creek and was never seen again. Or so we thought. When we started operating our trains here a little over 21 years ago, some of the locals told us of a few strange things they'd noticed. How on foggy November nights, if we came through here and blew our whistle for the crossing, they heard the answering whistle of another steam engine. Now, you and I both know there are no other steam engines operating in the Beeton Creek Valley, so the only conclusion we could draw is that perhaps this was the ghost of old number 99 reliving her last journey. Now, I'm always a little skeptical of those stories, so I've asked Engineer Smitty to bring us to a stop. This is as close as we can get to the spot where old number 99 left the rails all those years ago. And when we stop, I'm going to ask him to blow the whistle 3 times. Listen carefully and see if you can hear the ghost of Engine 99. Did you hear it? Listen again. There's definitely something else out there, and if it's not the ghost of old number 99, then I'm not sure what else it could possibly be. However, if you enjoyed my ghost story this afternoon, there's a couple of dates you need to mark on your calendar, and that would be the last Friday and the last Saturday of October. because that's the time every year when we run our annual Haunted Halloween adventure. Now this is the only time of the year that we take the train up the line at night, in the dark. We encourage all the passengers to come in costume. There's a best costume contest on every trip, sponsored by Tottenham Dairy Queen. But the most important part of that excursion is the story. The entire trip is dedicated to the search for the ghost engine that is known to inhabit this line. Now, I've told you about the history of our engine and the railway line that we're traveling along, but the part of the train that you see most during your journey, of course, is what you're sitting in right now, one of our vintage passenger coaches. We have 4 of them here at the South Central Railway that we use from time to time, typically 2 of them on any given trip. The first coach today right behind the engine is coach 321, built in 1929 for Canadian National Railways. That makes it our newest coach. And those of you sitting in that coach will see that it's a little different than all the rest. It's divided into 2 sections, with a passenger section in one end and a baggage section in the other. This is what the railways call a combine, which is short for combination coach. And that would have been very useful on a branch line like this, where they might only have 20 or 30 passengers on some trips. And they'd have luggage and baggage with them. There'd be farm equipment and supplies to drop off, farm produce, fresh milk, eggs, and butter to collect and take to market. Even the Royal Mail was carried on board the train in those days. In fact, there were 2 trains a day between Tottenham and Collingwood. So if you lived in Tottenham and you wanted to write a letter to your sister in Collingwood, if you made sure the letter was at the station by 9 in the morning, it would be on the 9:25 train headed north. Your sister could read the letter when they sorted the mail in Collingwood at 12:30. But it gets better than that, because if she wrote a really quick reply and made sure it was in the station master's hands by 1:45, that was the deadline for it to be on the 1:12 train headed south. You could read her reply before the post office in Tottenham closed at 5 o'clock. Just imagine getting a letter not one way, but both ways, all in the same day. Nowadays, that would take about 3 weeks. There's progress for it. Now, we don't carry the mail or farm produce or baggage anymore, or at least not very often, so we had to find another use for the baggage section. We use it to host our ever-popular baggage car birthday parties. Now, we've had all sorts of occasions celebrated on board the train: birthdays, anniversaries, retirements, Father's and Mother's Day, going away parties. The only thing we ask with the going away parties is if you're planning one of those, please tell the person who's going away in advance. We don't have to be the ones to break it to them. So you can celebrate almost any occasion on board the train for one low price. You get to bring up to 20 people. You have the exclusive use of the baggage section for one trip, and we even include a cake in the shape of our steam locomotive. Now, if you do want to book one of these trips, however, please book it as soon as you know the date that you want, because we can only accommodate 1 party per trip. Now, the coach that I'm standing in right now is coach 74, built in 1923 for the Toronto, Hamilton, and Buffalo Railway. That makes it our oldest passenger coach. It's also the last surviving passenger coach from that railway line. All the rest of the TH&B's fleet of more than 100 passenger cars have all long since been scrapped, except for this one. And our volunteers have worked very hard to restore it to its original mahogany paneled interior. Now, that's how all of these coaches were built originally: beautifully varnished inlaid mahogany paneling. This was the 20s after all. But after a few years, the railways discovered it was easier and cheaper just to paint it. And most of these coaches, when they came into our collection, arrived with 6 or 7 layers of different colors of paint all slapped on top of the woodwork. And our volunteers have worked very hard to restore them to their original glory. And speaking of our volunteers, I should point out something you may not have realized, and that is that this is an all-volunteer operated railway. We do not have any paid staff here at the South Simcoe Railway, so your train crew today, the folks that sold you your tickets, the track gang, the coach department, and even the board of directors are all volunteers, and they give their time to keep this piece of Canadian railway history operating. Now, this was a very busy railway line up until the summer of 1960, but that was when all passenger service on this line was discontinued due to declining ridership. And we believe that was mostly due to the completion of Highway 400, the province's first superhighway between Toronto and Barrie. Our freight service continued for another couple of decades, and by the early 1980s, the last freight customer on the line had closed the doors, so CN applied for and received permission to abandon the line and tear up the track. So why are there still walls underneath us today? Unfortunately for us, the local Chamber of Commerce purchased from CN the 5 miles of track between Tottenham and Beeton. Preserved it so it was available for our use. So they had this crazy idea that somebody might want to come along and run a tourist railway between the two towns. And it did seem like a crazy idea at the time, because here they were, the proud owners of 5 miles of railway track, but they didn't have any engines or coaches or crews or know the first thing about running a railway. Now in those days we were still running our mainline steam excursions out of the old John Street Roundhouse in downtown Toronto using the tracks belonging to CN and CP. However, they got increasingly tired of us playing with our antiques on their busy freight railway line and they told us to go take a hike. So we had engines and coaches and crews and no track. The local Chamber of Commerce up here had 5 miles of track and nothing else. Well, when you got the right heads put together, the solution to those two problems was obvious. We moved here. And we have now, for the past 22 seasons, been operating our excursions through the Beeton Creek Valley. However, north of Beeton and south of Tottenham, nobody purchased any of the property from CN, so they did complete the abandonment of the line, tore up the track, and reused the walls elsewhere. Our destination this afternoon is the village of Beeton. Beeton was not always known by that name. It was originally called Clarksville, named after one of the founding families. Well, that's not quite true. It was named by one of the founding families after themselves. Wasn't that nice of them? But after a few years, they changed the name. Had nothing to do with the song. It was long before that. They decided to call their town Tecumseh when a few local towns merged. Now that was a great name, rich in Ontario history. At least it would have been a great name if anybody had bothered to check whether or not there was already a town of that name in Ontario. Of course there was, down in the Niagara Peninsula. So after a couple of years of Canada Post trying to get the right mail bags to the right town, which is difficult when you have two towns with the same name, they told them they had to change the name again. Well, what to change it to this time? Well, they wanted to honor the town founders in a different way. The town founders had all been avid beekeepers, and they had convinced their friends and neighbors to take up the hobby, and it had grown into an industry. The village was once known as the honey capital of Ontario. You can still visit the Beeton Honey Festival every spring. So they wanted to call their town Beetown in honor of the worker who made this possible. They almost managed, too. They would have if the town clerk had been able to spell. Because if you read the minutes of the town council meeting, you can clearly see where everybody voted to call the town Beetown. If you read the letter that the town clerk drafted to send to Ottawa to register the name change, he left out the W, was registered as Beeton, and has been known as that ever since. True story. Now we're just about to cross our one and only bridge over the mighty Beeton Creek. We're afraid of heights, don't look down. Yeah, I didn't say it was a long bridge. And now that we've crossed the creek, you can notice that we are beginning to climb out of the valley, and we'll leave the Beeton Creek Valley behind. We're starting to climb up a large hill, and when we reach the top of this hill, I would invite you to keep your eyes open on the west side of the train, which is the side opposite the one you boarded from. You'll see a big white sign at the top of the hill with big black letters, and that will tell you the name of the place at which we have arrived. Now that spot used to be the end of the line for us, because when we began operations, this track had been out of service for more than a decade, and our first job was to restore the track to operable condition. And when we began our excursion trains, we had only been able to restore the track as far as the top of this hill, so that was as far as we could go. That made it the end of the line, and of course since we stopped there, by definition that also made it a station, and it had to have a name. And when you see the sign at the top of the hill, you will see what it is that we named it. And I'm sure when you all go home today, your friends and neighbors will ask what you did, where you went, and after you've seen this sign, you'll be able to tell them. Now we don't stop here at the top of the hill anymore. Our track gang worked very hard and restored the rest of the track all the way into the village of Beeton, which is where we're going to go this afternoon. So we don't stop at the top of the hill, it's only a point of historical interest. Consequently, the population up here has declined sharply since it's no longer a real station. In fact, I think there's 2 chipmunks, a squirrel, and a snake that live here now. I'm told the snake has been at his cottage all summer, so maybe the population is only 3.
That's interesting.
Here we come at the top of the hill, and there's the sign.
Nowhere. Mile 58.4.
We're now here.
Welcome to beautiful downtown nowhere. Now here's the trick question. How many of you saw the sign change? And I know at least one of you did because I heard it mentioned. The sign did change. As we arrived, it said nowhere. When we got there, it changed and it said now here. And if you don't believe me, keep an eye open when we travel south past the sign again. I guarantee you it will do the same trick. Now this is the top of the hill. We must be rolling down the other side towards our destination this afternoon. Now just a moment, you will feel and hear the brakes coming on. We're not quite at our stopping point yet, but this is what we call a running brake test, and every passenger railway in Canada is required to do this 1/2 mile from every station stop. The purpose is quite obvious and very simple if you think about it, is to make sure the brakes work. That's important. It would be really embarrassing if we came to our stopping point, applied the brakes, nothing happened, and we sailed right on through. Now, if you've been paying attention to my history lesson, you'll realize it would be worse than just embarrassing, because I did say that north of Beeton, all the rails have been removed. So if we were not able to stop, we would roll right off the end of the rails and land in a big field. We're pretty sure everybody would come out of their houses and point at us and laugh and say, look at them, they went off the beaten track. Now we are coming into the village of Beeton right now. You'll see we have lovely neighbors on both sides of the line. They're very friendly. If you see them waving, please wave back. If you see anybody on the west side here waving, let me know. The newspapers might be interested in the story. I have a friend in town who says he knows this is the most popular subdivision in town because people are dying to move in there. Now the railway came to Beeton in 1878, but it didn't actually go through the town. The railway line, in fact, was built 1/2 mile outside the town limits, and the original station was built 1 mile north of the town. It's not recorded why this happened, but we believe we know, because in those days the railways were in